This is TWiT.
So last week was the first emergence of CheckRain, and we noted that the official website, which as you and I talked about, I think in the beginning, it was initially CheckR1n.com, and there was no security certificate there, and bad guys grabbed CheckRain, RAIN.com, and put some malware there. So it's like, okay, the hackers sort of did the wrong thing by doing a hacker-esque domain name. Well, now we know the final name is CheckRA, CheckRA.in. So since there is a TLD.in, CheckRA.in. That's the official site. So this has continued to evolve. And of course, aside from the fact that, as we covered last week, the exploit for the Windows Bluekeep vulnerability has now been perfected so that it no longer has a high incidence of BSODs. I mean, and that's something I'm sure we're going to be talking about in weeks to come. Arguably, the most significant thing going on at the moment is the continuing work to perfect CheckRain, which, as we know, is the iOS CheckM8 boot ROM vulnerability exploit, which, and what makes it significant is because it is actually a ROM bug, it's never going to get fixed. It's going to persist in all the devices that Apple needs to continue supporting until they finally go out of support, which is probably going to be years. So anyway, since it's a big deal, I did want to sort of check in with where it stands today. When we talked about it last week, there were 3 betas, 0.9, 0.9.1, 0.9.2. Now we are at 0.9.3. We had also 9.3.2 and 0.9.5, which is, as of last night, is where we are. I didn't check yet this morning. I meant to see if we were yet at another one past that. They are continuing to find and fix and squash bugs, and it is becoming increasingly stable. Since I don't have any of my own firsthand experience with jailbreaking or with this particular emerging jailbreaking system, I went looking for some interesting and pertinent feedback from those who have been playing with it so far. Dan Gooden, who covers security topics for Ars Technica, had done some digging, and I've excerpted and I paraphrase a little bit from what he found and reported. It turns out those who have looked at it are finding that this CheckRain exploit is surprisingly reliable and robust. There are still platforms for which there is no support. There are some platforms, which is to say some iOS devices for which there is no support. There are some for which it's still a little bit flakier. Ryan Stortz, who's an iOS security expert and the principal security researcher at Trail of Bits, he said in his interview with Dan, he said, I expected it to be a little rougher around the edges for the first release. And of course, it's not even there. It's at beta. He says, it's really nice to be able to install a new developer beta on your development iPhone and have all your tooling work out of the box. He says, it makes testing Apple's updates much, much easier. And of course, it promises, once it's finished, to work reliably on a wide array of hardware, meaning everything from the A5 through the A11 chip. From the iPhone 4S was an A5, but I'm not seeing it being discussed. So it might be the 5S, which is the first one. That it may be going no further back. It may have been that the A5 is using on the iPhone 4 an earlier version of iOS, and they're not going that far back with iOS. But in general, it is surprising people for its stability and the speed with which it's moving forward. So, there's a lot of controversy in the industry about this, about its presence. Not that that's going to do anything to dissuade it from happening. The hackers who are putting it together are clearly having the time of their lives. They recognize, unlike previous jailbreaks, that they're investing in something that has legs. Inevitably, if a jailbreak ever becomes public, and it's only when it becomes public that it has an opportunity to acquire some user base, Apple will, of course, grab it and immediately close it. Fix it in an emergency patch in order to keep this from happening. So what we've historically seen is that Apple just squashes jailbreaks instantly, at the first chance they get, demonstrating how unhappy they must be with the fact that there is now one that they're never going to be able to fix. Yeah. And in reading into the industry's reaction to this, there are people who consider it a bad thing because I guess they're concerned that end users will use this in order to do things like we've seen back in the Android era, or in other closed ecosystems where users wanted to use an unauthorized launcher for their apps or something. I don't think that's going to happen because, first of all, as you were mentioning on MacBreak Weekly, our devices are being rebooted from time to time. I'm often picking up my phone after I had used it the night before and being told I need to re-enter my passcode, presumably because it did a self restart overnight, and I'm now in. So it rebooted. So this cannot persist across a reboot. So I regard that as a good thing because I would never promote the use of this for a persistent jailbreak on an end user device. I think this is interesting for the security community because it will give the security community, the white hat hackers, visibility into what Apple has been explicitly trying to keep away from everyone. Of course, the flip side is that the black hat hackers will also get visibility into what Apple is doing. And in both cases, if new problems are found, that those could potentially be exploited in non-CheckMate jailbroken phones in the same way that any new vulnerabilities that found in iOS are being exploited during the brief window of opportunity that exists. So anyway, I think this has been an interesting event. There's nothing Apple can do about it. We're soon going to have a robust, tetherable USB jailbreak, which has transient persistence, which will allow the security community to take a look into what Apple is doing in a way that they have never been able to before. And I think that's cool.
Just to be clear, because we actually was a little conversation about this in the TWiT forums.
Oh, good.
The jailbreak is transient, but you could do things to the phone that would not be transient.
It's not clear because
couldn't you install some? So one of the reasons people do jailbreaks is so they can install software, sideload software.
Yes,
if you did the jailbreak,
but that would not be signed by Apple,
and it would then be removed.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
So on a reboot, when the first moment that Apple sniffed an app that did not have their signature, meaning it did not come from the Apple App Store,
right,
it's gone.
Interesting. I mean,
yeah, so,
in theory,
so
somebody could be clever and figure out a way around that, perhaps, or rootkit or something.
I don't think there is a way around that because you're going to then have the whole secure boot chain all the way up,
and that's intact after the reboot.
It is absolutely intact after a reboot. So the vulnerability would be if you lost control of your phone at a border going into China, for example, or Russia, or pick on somebody, and they gave it back to you, it could have had CheckRain used to install something transiently, which would then have residence until you restarted your phone. The comments have been made that the official CheckRain app does place a CheckRain app, and it puts a couple things on your home page, making it obvious that it's there, but it's not clear that those could not be removed by a variant of CheckRain, which certainly somebody else could create. So what this does on older hardware is create a window of exploit between the time you lose your phone and somebody might compromise it until you next restart it. So the advice has been twofold. First, if you are someone who might be targeted and your phone is ever out of your control, power it down completely and then power it back up again, which will again let Apple purge anything that might have been done from the phone, or use a newer device. Because remember, nothing that's A12 or A13 is vulnerable to this. So, like Leo, every time I see the back of your phone, I think, oh, yep, Leo's got the latest and greatest. He's got the 3-lens monster.
It's a giveaway,
yeah, not a problem for you ever. And so, anybody who's concerned, this would be a reason to update to something that is at least A12, and if you're doing that, you might as well go to A13.
Right.
And if for whatever reason you have an older device, if it's ever out of your possession, and you have any reason to suspect that you might be a target, just power cycle it, and then you're going to be okay.
Good to know.
It is tethered, is USB, so it's just, in some ways it's sort of like a perfect flaw, because it can't be fixed. Apple needs to be providing updates for a long time to the A11 devices. I have one, an iPhone 10, and so I could do that to it. So it's I have an iPhone 6 for that matter, which is still being supported. So I think a really, really interesting exploit,
and relatively harmless, relatively benign.
Yes, yeah. and that's why I'm not worried about it. It is relatively benign, yet it does leave it. I mean, I understand Apple's interest in not letting people poke around. A year from now, the poking around that white hats will have been able to do will probably have fixed a whole bunch of things that will benefit all iOS users.
Right.
At the same time, the people who want to see inside for nefarious purposes, well, they've been able to do that too. Although it might be that they were able to get in anyway for through various ways. Right. So
anyway, in fact, really, so you could make a strong case is really only to the good.
I think so. I just think what we've seen is the more people look at software, the more problems are found and fixed, and Apple will fix them if they are responsibly disclosed. And so there's a huge community of people who see this as their first opportunity ever to roll up their sleeves and see what Apple has done. And there will be improvements to iOS that arise from that.
Yeah, that's good.